Hi everyone, this is Louis7 and the first real LOTRO basics video I have. And in case you missed it and want to know more about the series, I recently made a video which I will link in the comments and description, and that video was just about the series. Okay, so let's get to this one. And this episode wasn't originally planned to be part of like LOTRO basics and what this episode's about. But I'll be going over a leveling build for the Warden for the red line, and I will be doing this for every class and every spec, at least I plan to. It'll take a while to get through all of them. And I'm starting with Warden because it is one I'm familiar with, but this episode will focus on the red line. And I do want to mention right now, I initially planned on this episode going over all the lines, but as we'll see later, this is going to take a long time. So the reason to go with the red spec is because it's going to be your melee DPS line. It's good DPS, it's good for solo, and any general content you can do in the red line. Some harder content you may want to switch to blue line just because it's more survivable and tankier. But for, like I said, general stuff you can use the red line, and we'll see later that the red line can still solo some decent stuff, especially later on at high level. Speaking of high level, I am on my level cap Warden. The reason I'm doing an auto level cap character and not a leveling character is so I can actually show the build all the way through while leveling. Before I switch over, I do want to mention I have a Warden guide that I will be linking in the description, and I can't put an annotation in the video anymore for that. So we will go ahead and switch over to the other recording. I'll go over red DPS first because that's probably the one you're mostly going to be wanting to use while leveling. So you can see the red line right here. And before I forget, I am in school at the Mordor instance. It's a level 50 instance that scales to 105. It's a 3-man. And I'm here on my Warden just to show some of the strengths of certain lines for leveling and which may be good for certain parts. So this is just to show that, the gameplay a little bit. Okay, so let's go here. And then you can see red's melee DPS and has good AoE and melee damage, of course. So when you spec into red line, you get this javelin skill, and I pretty much don't use that skill in particular, but it'll go right here for red line. And that is one thing you get. It's not as bad at low levels, so while leveling you can definitely use your javelin skills. They're a lot stronger than at high levels, and they're good for pulling still. And just getting a quick regular attack off without having to build a gambit. So I'm going to move this stuff real quick to show the gambit builders better. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then 5's game battle memory. I always want to call it gambit memory. Okay, so back to the point of the leveling build. This is actually not too useful, the one on the left right here, basic strikes, because eventually you want to be using your gambit masteries. That's what these are. You want to use them more than your regular gambit builders, and just plus 5 up to 25% is not much. As you can see, these don't really do that much damage at all. This one does 1,000 damage. And compare it to a regular gambit you'd use real quick, that does a lot more damage, 3,000 initially, and then some extra damage. So it's really insignificant amount of damage, so let me clear that. And then the one on the right, you do use your bleeds a lot, so you want to get 5 points in this bleed damage. Those will be your first 5 points. And again, this is for red DPS, and it's going to focus on wanting to get through questing faster and just that general melee, if it's not too hard content, just to get through it quicker. Okay, so now you get the set bonus of plus 10% spear damage, generally a nice passive. And then this is a part that's a little bit conflicting. The physical mastery you get from this is pretty low. As you can see right now, I am at the level cap, so the scaling and stuff like that's a bit different than lower levels and while leveling. So I have about 50,000 physical mastery, a little bit less. If I go into this, I only get 1,600 more. But if we compare it to the others, it's still the best option, and especially while leveling, this will be useful. So we'll get 5 points in that. And then this next line is a little bit dependent on how you're doing at this point. My most recommended would be just 5 points in this, because light damage is something you often use. It's part of a lot of your skills. Even if you look at your morale taps, those are light damage, so that'll buff those. All these main damage skills you use are light damage, like this, some AoEs. These are all light damage. Okay, and then of course you have your spear gambits, like this one's a bleed and it's spear, so that would actually be buffed by the spear gambit damage, and this one from earlier, and the bleed damage from earlier. So we do use those. We do use light damage more often than that, so that's part of that. But there is a part, if you are having trouble surviving solo redline, I would recommend 5 points on this instead. And I would only put points in this if you're having trouble surviving in just regular redline. Otherwise, it's best to go ahead and put your 5 points on this middle one for light damage. So I'll go ahead and put the 5 in for light damage. That is, again, assuming you are surviving okay in redline. And of course, if you're not surviving okay, you can always switch to blue line. Especially for some harder content, you don't want to put 5 points in this just because you're facing hard content, when you could switch to blue line just as easily. Okay, so right now we have these two available. I forgot to mention real quick, sorry about that. The second line, the second row, this gambit, this trait actually is pretty useless because it has gambits we don't even use in it, that a Warden doesn't really want to use, and we don't want to consume bleeds because bleeds are a lot of our damage. We want to keep our bleeds, and we have better AoE options, so that's pretty much useless. In fact, it would actually decrease our DPS just by taking that. Okay, so now we have this next line open, which it looks like at this point you actually want to stay in this row, the third row. So we will take 3 points here, and before I forget again, I want to mention the trait bonuses on the left. This one's 15% chance to trigger gambit builder bonuses. These are passive bonuses. If you see at the bottom right, it's 10% chance to apply plus 5% light dot damage, and that'll last 15 seconds. So plus 15% to that, the chance to apply that's always nice. Again, it's a passive bonus like the first one. The third one's another passive bonus, critical chance and critical damage, generally nice. Other DPS specs get plus 5%, but we only get plus 2.5%. Okay, and then the fourth one, I know we're not there yet, but I want to go ahead and mention it. This one will just be after parrying or partially parrying, you heal a small amount of morale, and your gambit builders cost no power for 5 seconds. That one can actually be decently useful for solo just because it's always nice to get some passive healing. But when you're DPSing in like group content or with other players, it's not as useful. Mainly because you don't want to be taking too much damage, and if you aren't taking damage, you aren't going to be parrying, so that's not too big of a deal for that, but it's still useful for solo. And then again, at this point, if you're having trouble surviving, you can take 2 more points on the offense to get some morale tap damage increase if you want to be using your morale taps more often, but overall I'd still recommend 2 points in this. And that'll unlock the 4th row and get that parry trait bonus. So here we have dot critical damage, and the one before was dot critical chance. Well, if we want critical damage to even be useful, we want our dots to actually crit, so we want to increase our crit chance more before we get anything else. Okay, now this build's starting to look like a typical Warden build. We spent 23 points. I think at this point you'd probably be maybe level 40, around there. I'm not too sure exactly. Maybe level 50, depending exactly how many trait points you got from deeds and other sources. But anyway, we'll go ahead and spend some more points in the dot critical damage, because again, a lot of our damage is based off dots. You can see here, this is a dot, it's a main single target skill we'd use. AoE here's a dot. All our bleeds are dots. So a lot of our skill damage is based off dots, so we do want to boost those. Okay, at this point, we do want to advance to the next line, this left trait might seem useful, but it's actually not, because you don't really want to use those gambits because they're just not worth the time to cast compared to casting another dot, basically. So maybe if those were more useful in the future, we'd take that, but not right now. So this is, we'll go ahead and get lasting impression for additional pulses, because more pulses gives it more chances to crit for more critical damage before we even take the critical damage. So we'll go ahead and get the critical damage for the last ones, and once you get the 5th point in that, that will open up the last row. And then Honed Spike's the one on the right here, and I'll get to these in just a second. This one's actually not too useful. Even though you might use shield spikes, this isn't really that useful for your shield skills because you don't use too many as DPS. And if I take, for example, this one, it's not even that much damage, so whatever the shield spike increases, I think I have one to show right here. Like, that's plus 6% shield attack critical chance, and then plus 20% critical damage on top of that. It's not really worth much. So we'll go ahead and get 1 point in Recklessness, which is useful. It's a cooldown. It's a good cooldown we want to use whenever it's available, and it'll increase damage and critical rating, but do be warned, your defenses will go slightly down. It's not too big of a deal though, because the faster attack and faster damage means you could heal more and basically negate the downside of that. Okay, we still do not have this, but we can get it from going into another line still. So let's go ahead and cover these. This was the parry one way back here, so we need to get one after another. And this again is another just nice passive spear gambit damage at the bottom. But above that, defeating an enemy causes you to restore 5% of your maximum morale. That's useful, especially solo, but again in group content you don't want to be losing too much morale, but still it's a nice passive bonus if you're fighting trash mobs or something, so the healer doesn't have to heal you as much. So again, that's nice, just passive bonuses, and nice passive bonus for solo with the healing. And then here is just a big passive boost. It's got a lot in it, but it's not necessarily too big of a boost to our damage. So plus 5% melee damage, nice passive boost again. And then this increases the, this is basically makes your weapons better, the passive bonuses. So if I look at a club right here, I think I have a club, or there's a mace actually. The minus 20% movement speed. Yeah, this does not affect maces actually. It does affect spears, which have a passive plus, or passive chance to apply a little bleed. It's actually really small damage and not worth much, but this will have it more often. And then some other bonuses like plus 1% sword parry bonus modifier. That one's pretty useful. And then at the bottom again it goes back to spear, which has the damage of it greatly increased, which still is not too much, but it's a nice passive bonus if you use a spear. And then the attack speed debuff from a club. Here I have a club, so you can see minus 40% attack speed to the enemy, which is actually quite a lot, but you have a small chance, and it's not too big of a chance, but it's still a nice passive for any weapon you use, besides a mace apparently, or a hammer. Yeah, hammer, dagger, or mace aren't in that. Okay, so on to the last one anyway. Gambit's in the power attack gambit line, which is this gambit line. It's the single target bleed line. And the precise blow gambit line have a 15% chance to apply a secondary dot to their target, which stacks with the normal dot. This is pretty huge actually, because a lot of our damage comes from our dots, and a 15% chance to basically duplicate that to where it stacks is really nice. So this would have a 15% chance to do another 1000 damage every 4 seconds. That's the power attack line, which continues if I do it right. I think it's this. Yes, so this one would be 2700 twice if you get that 15% chance, and this precise blue line, again another single target light dot line. So this would also duplicate that, and this one would be 3,300 damage twice. 15% chance to happen, so that's always nice. Okay, so let's see what we want next, because we're done in the red line. This is actually all we want. And this is assuming you aren't taking on the offense. Of course, if you do take on the offense, you want to fill out the rest like this. But eventually you will want to get rid of that and head over here. And this would actually be more useful if you're trying to survive at this point. So if you filled all this out, I would not recommend putting 5 points like that. It would be better to spend your 5 points over in the blue line. I want to mention the yellow line isn't useful because nothing in it's really useful to what we do. Range damage, finesse. Finesse would be useful, but there's more useful stuff in the blue line, which we'll get to. Anyway, at this point you're probably leveled quite a bit, but we'll go ahead and continue here. Out of these two, you can do the evade rating from Warcry evade buff. I mean, it's okay. Or you can do this gambit line, damage and healing. This is probably better just because if you need a heal, it's a bigger boost. And that's your main self-healing line that's not based around morale taps or other stuff. And this is actually pretty effective healing. If you can see, it's 1600 morale initially and then heal over time for that much. So plus damage on that and plus healings on that's kinda nice. And then even though you aren't taking, I recommend Defiant Challenge because it's useful solo, and sometimes in instances you can still force taunt just because it gives you later on a huge mitigation bonus, so you don't take almost no damage. You can still take damage, but that's if there's a lot of mobs or a hard instance where you wouldn't want to be using it in any way. But based on our other choices, it's still the best. And then this is Persevere and Safeguard block rating. That's again the line we use for healing. So we'll go ahead and take this just to fill out the rest of this line. And then we have 12 points available, or at least I do. You could have a lot more points than me actually. But you're still leveling, you'll still be around this point probably. I'm not sure if you can get to the cap and only have this much. This is the most important part of the blue line, the light damage. So you'll definitely want to get this. So now that you have that, you can... actually, I forgot, the mitigation bonus we don't get in the red line. You do get it if you go into the blue line for solo surviving. Okay, so we will take this. This is again the most important part of the blue line for our red spec DPS, Warden. And while leveling, you'll probably be about done with leveling by the time you get this actually, but it's a good bonus to damage, 20% light damage, and again, a lot of our damage is light damage. This AoE, the AoE line we use, the single target line, which is our best single target line, just a lot of light damage, so that's nice. And then the last point I have is kind of really up to what you want to use it for. I personally prefer this just to have a chance if I happen to evade an enemy somehow, that I can have a Gambit Mastery reset, so that's just what I find most useful out of the options. You could get the plus mitigation bonus for Defiant Challenge. You could get the heal one here. That's probably what I'd least recommend out of these three. And then this one's just a decent passive bonus to, or not, well it is passive, but on active skills, and I meant support bonus because it gives Desolation and Mischance, which you will be using that Gambit in AoE. So if I had 2 more points, I'd probably take that one at this point. And then, yeah, I prefer this one just because if I do happen to evade, especially solo, so if you still get this and you're still leveling, this would definitely be the best option to have a Gambit Mastery reset, which would be very useful. Okay, so that's it for this line. I'm not gonna save those changes, instead I'm gonna actually go to my red line, which I actually probably need to fix, so I would not recommend following what I have in here. Because I was doing some testing with this, and I'd probably switch a couple points into this. Well, especially if I'm solo. If I'm not solo, it's not as big of a deal. but since I do solo a lot, it'd be best to switch some points into this, 2 of my points. Okay, so at the end here I'll do some real quick testing to show you, and I am still in the DPS spec, and I'm going to pull a bunch of stuff. I would not recommend this as DPS spec as a low level Warden, unless you happen to be geared for your level. Then use some stuff here. And then silences definitely are annoying for Warden. But you can see I'm using a lot of my light damage AoEs, and all those bonuses we had there were useful for that. So I'll show some more single target here. There's a boss. There's actually a boss upstairs that I'd rather go to for this. And then I need to, before I go all the way up, I need to make sure I won't die. So I'm going to kill these guys, hopefully. See, this is where actually the Gambit life tap damage would be a little bit useful, just because I need to use those just to stay alive in this situation. And while leveling, while I doubt you will need to pull this many mobs, if you happen to need to, or want to, that could be an option. Especially the more points you get. I did not mean to use that Gambit. I don't know why, I just like using that one even though it's bad. But yeah, you can see I'm using the life tap, so why there'd be reason I need to use a power restore here. Get my power up for the next mob. And I haven't been paying attention to my morale restoring when I kill mobs, but I assume it actually is. I don't know who's shooting me. There, it's an archer. So I'm gonna actually swap to ranged and use some of these gambits. Alright. Let's kill this boss and check out some single target where this is good. I'm gonna eat this real quick just so I can restore some of my power. Yeah, I have my potions are on cooldown. Okay. Get rid of that gambit. I do need to kill the other ads first before I focus too much on single target. Okay, right here you can see I'm going to be using that, and you can see the damage is a lot higher than the numbers we saw earlier. So this one has 5,500, about 5,500 for the dot, the damage on that, and 15% chance to apply that twice, which is really nice. Let some of my AoEs kill the other guys. So let's look at the spear line. I need to use that. And this one has a lot because of the expiration, and the second, the bonus thing, I'm not sure what it was called exactly. The Martial Fury, the secondary dot, that's what it's called in that. Actually, it also has the expiration damage bonus, so that's a huge boost if it happens. It looks like it did not happen there. I thought that might have. Here's what happens when the secondary dot does go off. It has that. And that has no resistance, so they can't remove it. And it's just good, pretty much. Okay, so hopefully that showed you what some of the red line's capable of. Again, I'm geared and at the level cap, so I was able to do more than probably while leveling. But that's it for the red line build. And that's again what I most recommend for solo, unless you are needing the tank or want to be ranged. Range definitely is an option still for Warden. And harder content, I would recommend going for the blue line. But the red line's still good for most content. and pretty much anything you need solo questing, at least with that. And then if you do want to solo some instances, maybe you could switch to the blue line. Okay, so that'll be it for this episode of LOTRO Basics. It was a lot longer than I planned, but hopefully it was useful for some leveling wardens. And I do plan to get to some other classes, some other specs and stuff. And if there's any class or spec in particular you want, please be sure to request it. And thanks for watching, everyone.